So I'd started off building a product specifically for retailers because that's what I know and love. And then I kept wholesale. One of those retailers was like, "Oh, I'd love this for my B2B business," and that's what got me looking at Shopify.
Gotcha. Ben, how you doing, sir? Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, man.
Absolutely.
Nice to
Absolutely.
have internet friends.
Yeah. Cool internet friends. So
Yeah.
what have you been working on lately? What's top of mind for you?
That's a good question. So long story short is I left CartHook about 2 years ago, and since then have been exploring other, call it like B2B SaaS companies in e-commerce.
Mm-hmm.
I've been consulting as like a fractional CTO for subscription e-commerce brands. I've been working with one in the city for a while, and just figuring out like a different niche and market that I'm interested in trying to build a solution for within like a similar, we'll call it mid-market e-commerce brands. And so
Mm-hmm.
Early on was looking at retail, which is what our market is for CartHook, and what I'd say a lot of my own personal experience was around like tools for retailers
Mm-hmm.
and performance marketers who sell retail. And over the last like 6 months, I've been getting into wholesale and B2B and looking around like
Gotcha.
what exists or doesn't. So that I have a product that one brand's been using for the last like 9 months, and have been trying to find other merchants who are like them. I think it's interesting. Like I've gone through this process several times at this point, with multiple brands and B2B, done one B2C, and I'd say like this time around, I've tried to be really intentional around the price point of the product.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things I know I think Jordan's been on your podcast.
Yeah.
One of the things that we realized early on was just the power of the price point around the types of merchants that you're working with.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the things that I've really enjoyed is working with brands who, they're doing decent revenue. And so it's not a question of them getting product market fit. They're confident, they're smart. They're not trying to find an app or a product to like solve their sales problems, which I think, especially in the Shopify world, that's like the entrant price point is intended to be for a lot of aspirational stores, which,
right.
Everyone starts somewhere, and I don't, I'm not that, but, or I'm not an e-commerce merchant rather, but for me as an engineer and a product person, I just really enjoy working with folks who already kind of have their product dialed in.
Mm-hmm.
And what they really want to do is figure out how to, get onto we'll call it the more complicated problems around increasing LTV,
Mm-hmm.
ways to really monetize or to build their existing business.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. It's interesting with the mid-market thing, because I've been in the Magento land for so long,
Yep.
and I've been
Yep.
starting to kind of branch out to really kind of dive into some of these other e-commerce platforms and communities and stuff. And it's interesting to see, like the B2B thing was a huge emphasis for Magento, and I think that was their kind of differentiation. Like, okay, yeah, Shopify,
Mm-hmm.
has, the SMB side of the market, and a lot of the B2C, even mid market. It's like let give us B2B at least, like let this be our like thing. And so it's interesting to see other platforms tackling that, and I'm super curious to jump into that. On the CartHook thing, I'm really interested. So you were involved in that from the beginning. You were the CTO, the technical co-founder.
Yeah.
That's
So I had built and sold a company in B2B SaaS. Now it's like many moons ago, but it was like 6 years ago. And I was figuring out what I was going to work on
B2B
next.
SaaS even exist 6 years ago?
Barely. Yeah. Well, that's a whole nother story. Built like basically an early version of OnlyFans.
Nice.
So we've been running that company for 10 years. And so it's been actually interesting seeing Patreon and OnlyFans come in, because they've really added a lot of, we'll call it, legitimacy to the market.
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, that's a whole nother story.
It's
So
a whole other
I was,
episode on a whole other
yeah,
podcast.
yeah, yeah. And so I was actually, some friends and I from New York, we all had rented a house. Some New Yorkers, we rented a house for the winter on Venice Beach. Like, so it was like five entrepreneurs. We're all technical, kind of nerdy guys. We rented a house because it's friggin' cold in January and February,
Right.
and we worked from there. And around that time, Jordan and I randomly, I think, crossed paths by, like, he saw like an investor deck that I had posted online after we had sold the business, and he was looking for a technical co-founder. He had built sort of like a cart abandonment product based off of his experience as an e-commerce merchant. And I was figuring out what I wanted to work on next. So initially it was just like a social conversation. And then he was like, hey, I'll fly down to LA next week and maybe we can talk in person. And so I
Nice.
was like, I like this. This is good.
Yeah.
And, so from that point on, that was, the rest is, as they say history. About 9 months into that brand, we identified the opportunity within the Shopify space, in part based off of what we were seeing with our first product in cart abandonment, and doubled down on the Shopify opportunity.
Hmm.
Had raised a little bit of money from friends and family, and yeah, no, it's
It's a super
a
successful
journey.
product. Yeah. And so then you kind of decided to about 2 years ago, you kind of wanted to build something fresh, like something greenfield. Is that sort of the
Yeah, I mean,
motivation?
I won't get into the details of it, but what I'll say is that like, things are all good between Jordan and I. I think whenever you have two people building a business, and at the time it was weird because I was the only person in New York, and we had intended to build a remote company, but it wasn't honestly remote. We had an office in Portland, Oregon,
Hmm.
where Jordan's based, and then our first engineer, who we really built the team around, he was awesome. Rock, he's based in Slovenia, and so I was the person in between Portland, Oregon, and Slovenia.
Hmm.
And I will say that the transition of just figuring out how to make communication work,
Hmm.
um, there were a lot of things we learned. I can't speak
Yeah.
for him, but I'm still an owner of the CartHook business. I'm still involved. Jordan and I still talk,
Yeah.
not as much as we used to, but we're still friends.
Yeah.
And so I think
That's awesome. Yeah. We
that's
actually,
the saga.
yeah, no, that makes sense. It's funny because on the podcast, we actually talked about how there was sort of two different offices and it was sort of
Yeah,
remote-ish in that sense, but not really
yeah,
distributed. And that they recently
yep,
have sort of gone more fully distributed and stuff like that. And that transition is a
yep,
tough transition to make. Um, but
yeah,
uh, but yeah, it's a huge success with that product. And so B2B SaaS and B2B ecom and wholesale in the
yep.
shop. So this is news to me that like shop are people starting to tackle this space in Shopify?
That's what I've been trying to understand. Honestly, I think the I mean, hey, they acquired Handshake for close to, from at least in the publications, it says about
Right.
$100 million a couple of years ago.
Right. Right.
And so, I've been trying to just orient myself around opportunities in wholesale and B2B.
Mm,
It's I looked at CBD, I looked at high risk payment processing. I was just basically just looking at areas of e-commerce that not everyone and their mom is like trying to compete over. I
yeah.
think unless you're going to raise a bunch of money, it's it's a tough business, and you become competing on margins, and it's not one that I necessarily think that I'm best suited to start another company around,
Hmm.
or want to, unless they're going to raise a bunch of money, which is not my intent. So,
Hmm. Yeah. Did you see that you
um,
mentioned payment processing? Did you see
yeah,
the thing with Twilio recently, like A/B tested Stripe against a bunch of different payment processors and saw like a 10% lift in authorizations against all these other payment processors? I just saw it
Twilio
like a
did
day or
this.
two. Yeah, Twilio did it. And they saw this pretty significant improvement in
No,
as far as I
I'll check
understand,
that
it's
out.
just straight up testing the payment
Yeah,
processor itself as far as what it can authorize. And I thought that was interesting. I was looking at one of the you read a lot of articles and you post them
Yeah.
on your Nuzzle, right? Is that
Yeah.
the yeah?
Yeah.
And I was checking out some of those, and one of the articles was interesting. Talked about how B2B customers want to pay on terms, right?
Yeah.
They might want to finance a payment using their inventory financing and things like that. So that feels like kind of a problem to be solved.
Yeah. And I think at least within B2B, it there's a bunch of different type of B2B businesses. And so as with anything, it's like, how do you eat an elephant? It's like one bite at a time. I honestly, I actually don't even know if that's the expression. It's probably something around that.
Something like that.
If you were to eat an elephant, it probably should be one bite at a time, regardless of whether or not that's the expression.
Right.
But you have like financing terms. There's net 30, pay a half up front, and so it's actually not clear to me as an engineer is exactly how people are using the Shopify platform for wholesale.
Mhm.
I've been going through compiling all the different apps, trying to just understand and familiarize myself with call it the market.
Mhm.
You also have these actual marketplaces like Fair, um, Jure.
Miracle
There's like a
has their product for.
New Order
Mhm.
is another one, which was interesting. So because my girlfriend, so she's a home decor designer and sells retail and wholesale. So I will say I started randomly dating the right person during a pandemic, in part because like I'm
Purely
talking
a
to her and she like
coincidence.
I'm just yeah
I'm
I'm
not
just
doing
like I'm
market
like
research. You're not part of a market
yeah
research opportunity, I promise.
right yeah no totally. Well then she's like, well, can you make my Facebook pixel work for my Instagrams? And I was like, oh yes, I can do that. I was like, I might not be handy at home, but I can at least fix your tech and I can get
Right,
your Facebook pixel working.
right.
Um, but no, it's fascinating because she sells through like Anthropology and but also through her own site, and
Mhm.
her site's on Squarespace, so she's selling wholesale through Squarespace. And I'm like wait, what? um, but I've since found several other people who sell wholesale through Squarespace, and so it's just like with her, she's a designer, so we'll call it the ability to merchandise a cart really matters a lot, where it's not like you're buying a bunch of line items. You're putting together a season or a collection of products that you really want to be purchased together. So when
Mhm.
you're working with like an interior designer, they're buying the entire ensemble, not
Mhm.
just a commodity. So what I've learned in wholesale is, and I have so much to learn, is that it really depends on the type of wholesale business and like what you're selling. And is it mid market or mid tier? Is it luxury? What's the price point? Because like there's certain things like Fair that, from what I understand, really they're geared towards lower price point products. So if you're a luxury product, you're probably not, from just a brand perspective, going to be on something like Fair. So
Mhm.
anyway, I could talk all day about this stuff, but it's I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to educate myself with
Yeah.
the wholesale.
Yeah. Yeah. You're in that building and market research phase, which is a
Yeah,
cool phase. Um,
I
when
was gonna say
they're
like to answer.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was gonna answer your questions around like what I'm working on. So I'd started off building a product specifically for retailers because that's what I know and love, and then I kept wholesale. One of those retailers was like, oh, I'd love this for my B2B business, and that's what got me looking at Shopify.
Gotcha. Okay.
And so up until this point, we've basically been trying to build as little as possible, and what we've been building could potentially work for retail or wholesale. But I've gotten to that point in the business where I'm like, I need to do a better job of identifying what's the market segment. And been, the biggest thing for me is understanding what's the segment of the market that does wholesale on Shopify. Because, if we were to take this product, which I mean, in terms of like, what are some of the variables to lock in? Like, I want to stay in the Shopify app ecosystem because I understand it. Um, it's something that I'd say like one of my unfair advantages, just because my experience and knowledge around the APIs and just comfort level with how the tech works.
Mhm.
Um, but I need to make sure that it aligns with is the B2B segment a growing market in Shopify.
Mhm.
So, anyways. I don't know
That's
if you
a
have any knowledge or
No,
information
I
that you
mean, I
can.
don't. I'm kind of curious. I'm kind of an observer and of that, this phenomenon and this trend in the market, and I'm trying to kind of wrap my head around it as well. I'm curious, like when they're selling B2B through Squarespace, because a lot of
Yeah.
what I understand about selling, B2B and wholesale is it's just all manual. It's just all email and
Hmm.
spreadsheets. So are they essentially, using the website as like basic lead generation and then just doing everything manually?
What's funny is that, I mean, if you read the marketing of any of these apps, they all promise that they automate it for you.
Hmm.
So I think you're right in terms of like from everything when I've dug in and for the merchants I've spoken with around like what are you spending your time and money, a lot
Mm,
of it's manual exporting documents to interface with QuickBooks. You're dealing with um, yeah, line sheets. There's I, as far as I can tell, there is a lot of manual labor,
mm,
except, but there's also a lot of apps that say they eliminate that. So I think it's one of those things where my guess is that there's a bunch of different products that try to be fairly broad solutions,
mm,
um, and they all kind of accomplish some things.
mm. Yeah. And do you want to talk at all about the product you're building? Is it kind of in stealth mode or?
I mean, it's not really it's not in stealth mode. It's as I said, part of the challenge has been clarifying the target audience. So what
Mm,
I can tell you, and I think honestly, because otherwise I'll just confuse people. The simplest, so it's like know your audience. The simplest thing I can say is I've been exploring tools to improve repeat purchase rates
mm,
for existing customers. So, for example, if you are selling perishable goods, and once you've acquired a customer, the natural expectation is that you want to then sell to them again. So, how do you remove the friction in that? Oftentimes, they're sending email marketing, and so one of our products has been to, or the product really was focused on how to effectively pre-building a merchandise cart and
mm,
making it so you can buy it with a click. Um,
mm,
right? So how do you eliminate the friction and make it easy to personalize a product for someone who's previously purchased from you,
mm,
and then they can make some tweaks to customize it to
mm.
exactly what they want, and because otherwise you'd be doing that through email exchanges, and surprisingly a lot of this is not stuff that you can do on the actual native Shopify platform.
Mm.
um,
Right. And so this is different than from your coupon app that you're building for A/B testing coupons.
oh yeah, the life of a self-funded company.
Got a
So
lot of
I
irons
have
in the
done that.
fire.
I'd say I have two irons. I have the um, all of my consulting over the since leaving CartHook has been focused on we're getting to know as an engineer. Part of what I've learned is like doing a better job of seeing the worldview of a merchant. And so my intent for doing like the fractional CTOing with brands was on one hand, yes, cash flow, but also to just really have a better sense of as a engineer who's working and building tools for e-commerce brands, like what are the internal struggles and like what's the world look like from the perspective of these brands.
Mhm.
And so as I have tried to keep myself from doing a lot of engineering myself, and so we got to a point where I needed to hire an engineer, and since the revenue, I'd say the revenue is fairly negligible for this product. What I've done is I have effectively built like a boutique Shopify app agency, and I'm building that coupon app for a company,
Oh, okay.
and I'm basically responsible for helping them launch it. And that's a way that I'm able to uh, pay for the engineering that like the engineer that I have.
Gotcha. That's awesome.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I've heard it's really like you were talking about kind of the unfair advantage you have around knowing the APIs. I've heard
yeah,
it's pretty hard to, and I recently helped somebody hire like an app developer, but like I've heard it's pretty hard to find developers that really know the API well. It like the API is great, it's well documented, but that I don't know that there's a lot of ins and outs to it. There's changes you got to keep up with. When you want to do a lot of heavy lifting, there's complications and stuff like that.
Yes,
Yeah.
I would say yes to all of that. It's like a lot of things are, let's call it like simple things are fairly easy to accomplish.
Right.
Where things get complicated, or when you start trying to tackle more complicated problems.
Hmm.
Um, and part of it depends on the permissions available to you as an app. Like now, there's like 4 different types of apps. You can make custom apps, you can make private apps, you can make unlisted public apps.
Hmm.
All of which, Shopify has a policy around how much of a rev share they'll take, which is considerable,
Right. Right.
even if you're not in the app store. Um, and similar to Apple, although I just read that Apple dropped their rev
They
share
dropped their
to
rates, right?
15%
Yeah. Yeah.
if you're
Yeah.
making
Yeah.
less than $1 million a year. Um,
Right.
so, but
Right.
that's any marketplace. Um, and so the APIs are fairly straightforward, but there's certain APIs you can't use, right? Like there's certain APIs you can only use if the customer themselves is on like Plus. Another early example was you
Right.
couldn't do dynamic coupons early on.
Hmm.
So if you were someone like like early for cart abandonment, we couldn't generate like one-time coupons for people because we didn't have,
Right.
like, unless you were on Plus. But I think Klaviyo was able to get permission to do it because they were so big. So those types of those things are challenging. Where what's in the API docs isn't necessarily what you can do, um,
Right.
and there's certain things that are just sales channels, and then what constitutes a sales channel? Well, it can't be on a website. It needs to be like through like if you're buying through a game. And so it becomes a little bit complicated anticipating what are the issues. I think of it kind of like you're building on someone else's house,
Yeah.
and you don't necessarily know what their electrical looks like, and like a socket could just disappear. Um, so
Yeah. There's always that platform risk.
yeah,
Which, like, do you think about that? Like, do you think that building a business on top of another platform is pretty risky?
I mean, hey, there's pros and cons. I think the biggest risk in general is not building something that customers care about. And
Right.
as an engineer, I've spent a long period of my life doing that.
Right.
I think the and so for me as someone, but I think part of what's been interesting to me, and I mean, you're an engineer, I'd be curious to hear like how your perspective has evolved. But like one of the things I realized, and I'll say part of the challenge that I even ran up against in CartHook, was I was transitioning from being an engineer to being head of product. So
Mhm.
my background is as a designer and a programmer. I studied English in college, but I've been a programmer since I was in 5th grade, and I worked at a tech company during the first .com boom. So like
That's
I've just
awesome.
always loved computers and building stuff and like shooting music videos and using computers to be creative.
Yeah.
Um, I'm not like the type of person who sits like goes and majors necessarily in computer science.
Right.
I've built several computers. But I really just love making stuff and solving problems. And so
Yeah.
I think the challenge there is figuring out, like, some people would call that a product role. Um, some people would consider that like an engineering role. The truth is, early on, I would do the designing, I'd do the programming, and I would
Mhm.
be also the business owner. And so for me, it was super easy, especially when the technologies were simpler, to be able to have all those hats.
Mhm.
But I will say that like the specialization, like you have to be fairly specialized, just to like stay up to date with how front end has evolved as well as back end.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and so, I mean, that's a bigger conversation. Um, and I know you recently had a conversation about specialization and generalization.
Generalization. Yeah. Yeah. That's
Yeah,
yeah. That's an
yeah. I
interesting
listened to a few of your
tie-in.
episodes to prepare for this,
Nice, man. Yeah.
or to
That's
orient myself.
yeah. That's awesome, man. No, it's an interesting thing. Myself, like background as a developer, and then I started building my own stuff, and I learned a little bit of design, and then you kind of start using Tailwind, and before you know it,
Yep.
stuff looks
Yep.
halfway decent. And yeah, like I think I'm good at kind of identifying the market need, building something, bringing all those skills together. What I'm not so good at is then really like scaling the technology, like really focusing on the technology. It's like I have enough
Hmm.
of all of the skills to like
Yeah.
get something out the door. But then I tend to stop really iterating and improving the core product, which you got to do. And, you know,
I mean, it's a tough balance, man. And, I think the more I've learned and the more I've done, it's gotten harder. I think
mm,
where I've, especially, I think it depends on different learning styles. And I imagine, especially if you're homeschooling, is it a daughter?
yeah,
You're
we have
homeschooling your
three
daughter.
kids, two
Okay. Oh
daughters
my
and a
goodness.
son.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, but I'm sure
Yeah,
they all have different learning styles.
they
And
do.
so
They do.
for me, I'm a tactile learner. So like I learn by doing things. And so after having been building products and stuff that weren't like necessarily they were I'd say admittedly, I think most of the products I built have been cool ideas. And they've been useful. And if you look through my portfolio, you'll like see products I built just couldn't build that wasn't necessarily a business.
Right.
They like scratched an old itch. Like after college, I built an app to pre-buy drinks in bulk from bars. This is around the same time that Groupon launched, and I was like, "This is just cool." And like, I have a bunch of
Yeah.
friends who are all poor, just graduated college,
Yeah.
um, and so the but to really get far in anything, you need to be able to be fast enough to build while also figuring out what to build.
Hmm.
You need to be able to build it, and then and the context switching, at least for me, is really challenging.
Hmm.
And sometimes, especially as an engineer, like I'm comfortable building stuff,
Hmm.
but I know, especially having gone and built several businesses at this point, I know it's dangerous for me to get too involved in the building, because
Hmm.
at least there you can build clarity. But what I've also found is not building is also really dangerous, because you figure out a lot of the problems.
Yeah.
You answer a lot of the questions building stuff and thinking and working it through. And so
Yeah.
um, trying to find some sort of balance
Right.
is where I'm shaking out.
Yeah. I've been thinking a lot about how to identify like the thing that you uniquely are good at and love to
Hmm.
do, you know? And it's like I feel
Yep.
like I'll get glimpses of it and I'll move towards
Yeah.
it and then I'll be like, I don't know if that's it. Um, and I think the people that really take off, I feel like they've found that thing, you know,
Hmm.
they found that thing that they just love to do and, can just throw themselves into it.
Well, I think part of the challenge there, though, and it depends on how you define that success, right? Is it commercial success? Because what matters is that the thing that you care about, or at least the thing that you're making, whatever it is, like you need to arrive in a place where what you're making also appeals to other people.
Hmm.
And that's in some ways like the difference between art and advertising.
Hmm.
Like when I was taking art classes in college, there was always this like, oh, you're in the advertising program, you're a sellout.
Right.
Um, and it's the truth is somewhere in between, where you can't just make things simply so they're a commercial success. On the flip side, um, I think Basecamp has written enough about this.
Yeah.
And actually, so what I'm trying to do these days is follow their shape up process fairly closely, where
Nice.
it's it's not perfect. It doesn't work exactly with the way that I work, but it's at least provides a common language to use with other engineers and designers.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
That's really cool. I haven't read the book, but I've listened to a couple mentions of it on podcasts, and I've seen some people talking about it. I feel like I get the basic shape of the of the book.
but
Um,
um,
but but so what are some of the aspects of that kind of process for product development that you're using?
well, so and I think a lot of this comes down to remote, which is the need to document stuff, which I would say is one of the challenges I've experienced with working with like in person, especially when you're combining in person with remote. The amount of documentation that someone who's remote needs to be able to make sure that like there's just a lot of documentation, because those are conversations you'd otherwise be having in person and in hallways,
Mm-hmm.
and unless it's documented, no one else is going to know about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, what's been helpful about ShapeUp is I've tried like a dozen variations of different types of project specs and scopes.
Mm-hmm.
I took a course with Heaton Shaw that he taught around like how to do product manage, like basically how to like plan for product and put together a product and build products so you don't, how do you do like technical estimates accurately?
You don't.
And so
Narrator,
you
you
don't.
don't.
Right. Well, I will say one of my biggest takeaways though from even that course was talking about like if anyone as an engineer, like do not or let me, as someone who works with engineers and as an engineer myself, it is unacceptable to hear that something will take 5 days. If it's going to take 5 days, the scope is not clear enough. I think, and I think you can make that argument. I mean, I would even make that argument if something's going to take more than like 4 hours. There's very few things like you haven't defined it closely enough.
Totally.
And I think with ShapeUp, what I appreciate about it, even some of the feedback that I've gotten from engineers that I've worked with is they don't, and that like as an engineer, I try to put myself in their shoes, which is you don't want to be micromanaged, right? As soon as someone's feeling micromanaged, their brain shuts off. Yeah. They're not thinking about how to solve the problem. They're thinking about here are the 20 steps that I need to go through. And I think what ShapeUp advocates for is delegate, it's like delegating responsibility for the outcome. We need to define what's the output, mm-hmm. and how much effort is that output worth. So effectively it turns into we do not move deadlines, we just change scope. And so this is what the problem that should be solved is, and we have 1 week to solve it. Mm-hmm. And as we're building it and working on it, there will be bits and pieces of the scope that might need to change, but ultimately what you're responsible for is delivering, solving the problem. And then you as an individual are allowed to create whatever documentation you need for just yourself and tasks, mm-hmm. For yourself. I think that's where I've gotten into a lot. Like I've had a virtual assistant for 8 years now.
Oh, really?
I need to have a shared Trello board with like, what is she working on? Because mm-hmm. otherwise I'll be thinking like, I don't know, like things cannot float in the ether when you're working with a remote team. They have to be somewhere so that you don't have to, otherwise you're going to be a pain in the ass, just like following up with everyone asking, hey, are you done yet?
Right. Right. That's interesting. I've been going back and forth on the virtual assistant thing recently. Has that worked out well for you over the years?
I couldn't live without Dee. Her name's Dee. And so, we've worked together for 8 years. I went to her wedding. I think that was the first time we actually met in person, was at her wedding.
That's really cool.
No, man. Like, and I think it's part of that's just my own personality. I've eaten the same thing every day for the last like 9 years.
Nice.
I hire experts to like optimize around things that I hate.
Yeah.
And luckily one of my superpowers is that like most habits, like I can, as long as I can change my habits, like I can do more or less anything. I don't care about like new and exciting foods. I love eating the same thing every day.
Dude,
so then it becomes a question of, well, pick the right thing so that you don't get fat, or
right.
like so that you can like hit your fitness goals.
Right.
Sorry, what were you gonna say?
Dude, I have been on this. I eat basically the same thing now for like a few months. I was doing Chipotle for a while. I was on the Chipotle diet. And then I was like, I got to bring this in house. And I basically chicken breast, beans, and green beans. And I recently started doing one meal a day. I was skipping breakfast, and I plateaued, and I was like, I got to skip dinner too. So I've been doing one meal, and it's
intermittent fasting.
Yeah, and basically, it's fantastic. Yeah. So you're your Twitter, your branding is skinny and bald, but you seem like you're in pretty good shape. Are you pretty into like, okay, we got the bald component?
I'm bald.
Yeah.
I was also 24 when I came up with it, and I was definitely skinnier.
And then you stuck with it.
And I worked in advertising.
Yeah.
I was a freelance art director and programmer. I was a Flash developer.
Nice.
And so I was working with brands, and I basically needed a memorable website. And so I was like, what's something fun that, someone looks at me, and over time it could become ironic. Like, hopefully I won't be fat and hairy someday. I did think about putting that domain just in case. But no, so that was like skinny and bald was people can spell it. It's fun. And also I think it captures my personality, which is like, I'm kind of skinny, kind of bald, right? But yes, you're right. Like I'm definitely bald, skewing more towards bald these days.
Right. So you work out? You work out a good bit and lift weights and stuff?
Well, I mean, COVID made that really complicated.
Right, right.
um, and so I gained some weight from that, and so I've been getting back into shape, and yeah, so it's I would say I do the least amount for fitness. Like I basically have these like habits that are really important to me around nutrition,
Mhm.
only because I care about like survive, like I want to live,
Yeah,
and I want to be in the best shape that I can be, just quality of life, and I don't want to think about it beyond like basically I want a regimen, I want to follow it, and then I'll use all my brain power to deal with all the crazy business and like product stuff that comes up.
yeah.
That's my own personal inclination.
I love that,
What about
dude.
you?
Yeah, I'm kind of similar. It's a little harder when you got a bunch of kids because they mess up
Oh, I
your
can't imagine.
schedule and everything. And when it comes to food, like there's always like snacks in the kitchen and stuff. And then I'm telling my wife, I'm like, we got to get less snacks, you know. And
Yeah.
so it's a little trickier, but yeah, I'm similar. I watched this video recently of this guy, like this minimalist guy on YouTube that like wears the
Hmm.
same shirt every day.
Yep.
And he has this whole video on wearing the same shirt every day for 3 years. And
Hmm.
I was like, that's a great idea. I got to try that out. You
Yeah,
know,
I do that. Like if I were to
do
open
you?
this behind me, I have a spreadsheet of all the clothes that I just buy again. Yeah, no, I'm dead serious. I
I
buy the
love
same shoes again. I
I
buy the
love it.
same pants.
That's
Uh,
awesome. That's awesome.
I mean, it's but to your point, it's harder when it's not just about your life anymore, right? Like you have
Yeah.
a family. For me, it's like my girlfriend would murder me if I ate literally the same thing every night.
Right. Right.
Um,
Right.
so I think that's part of growing up too, is finding that balance, that happy balance.
Yeah, yeah. What are some other like habits or like what does your schedule look like to help you get into like a good creative flow state, stuff like that?
I live by my calendar, and I've had a process that I've naturally followed probably for the last 10 years. I actually wrote a script that scrapes my calendar at 3 in the morning every night, creates a new Trello board of everything that I have for meetings and calls that are listed. So when I wake up, I have a to-do list for
Nice.
today. That's a combination of my calendar as of events that are and like other things that I've put in. And then every time I do something, I move it to the done list. And I have like my own vocabulary of like M is a meeting, C is a call. It takes all the calendar details and puts it onto the Trello card itself.
Mm,
And this is something that, and every week I review all of the things that I've completed in the cards of Trello for that
mm,
week, and then I archive them. And so I would. It's not that I'm regimented. It's just that I try to be really mindful around budgeting my time.
mm.
Um, and so for me, and the intent there is to not always be busy, um, and to make sure, 'cause especially as an engineer, I can get sucked into something. And next thing you know, I've spent an entire like day on something that ultimately didn't really matter.
Mm,
And so I've just tried to get better around being proactive instead of reactive.
mm.
And so my calendar, it drives a lot of my friends, and probably my girlfriend crazy around. I'm like, oh, you want to do something? Please send me a calendar invite. And it's not intended to be dismissive. It's my process for being able to like to be able to focus on what's in front of me.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and so yeah, but like writing a script that does it myself, I'm not sure if that would be useful for anyone else. I've thought about like trying to productize that into a business, but
Right,
the more I talk to my friends, they're all like, a lot of it's, oh, I wish I could follow a schedule like you do, but
right,
I can't, or I don't want to.
right.
Um,
Yeah, I've
what about you?
I've gone in and out of phases of being real like schedule oriented. I've been starting to
Yeah,
skew again more scheduled recently. And my wife always makes fun of me because when we were dating in college, I was real schedule. I had a schedule. It was blocked out. Each day was blocked out, studying time, math time, friends
yeah,
time, all that kind of stuff.
yeah,
And I had it up
yeah,
on my wall. And so she would be like, "Hey, do you want to hang out?" I'd be like, "No, I can't. You know, this is my whatever
yeah,
time, or this is my time to hang out with guys, or whatever." It was like, it was
yeah.
real intense, and it drove her nuts. You know?
Well, and I think, but I think it's important because otherwise we all have 24 hours a day, And
Yeah.
it's really easy for other things or situations and people to define your priorities. And I think, and I will say, going back to your examples of people who have been like, we'll call it disproportionately successful,
Mm-hmm.
like the Elon Musks or the Jeff Bezos, or I mean, there's a lot more examples than just the folks we talk about. But I'd say a lot of them have been very intentional. I would assume people I know, like from what I have observed and from what I know, these people are very intentional with their time.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that's prioritizing social events or not prioritizing social events.
Mm-hmm.
All these people have been really good around to building infrastructure that allows them to focus on what they want to work on,
Mm-hmm.
while also not being spread too thin.
Yeah.
Right, like not letting, and that becomes the risk of trying to do a lot of things. Is if you're running a bunch of businesses and you're not really regimented, you're not going to accomplish anything.
Yeah.
Which is, so having a calendar and having some process where when a fire comes up, which inevitably it will, you need to have pre-established some rules and like procedures around, if this comes up, I'm going to ignore it because I've already decided how I'm going to deal with situations like this.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe sometimes the solution is to hire someone who's responsible for it.
Yeah.
Which is what I like to do.
Yeah. Yeah. What are some of the other you mentioned virtual assistant, but what are some of the other
Yeah.
roles that you've hired recently and that have
I had a
been
cook for a
helpful?
while.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, she would measure my food. She, yeah, like I felt like I'm really, I don't know how to cook. And it's embarrassing, and it's not something I like to invest a whole lot of time into.
Right.
It seems like a whole lot of time, and I eat to live. I don't live to eat.
Yeah.
And so I basically gave her the macros, and I asked her to create some recipes that would fit my macros. And I really love Mexican food, and so she'd made me like amazing, like basically it was like really good Chipotle, except it was like natural, like super fresh.
Yeah.
And it matched exactly. And then if I wasn't making progress, I could ask her, hey, try to reduce the carbs, because like I wasn't like losing weight or something.
Yeah, that's
um
smart.
and that was really cool. And she would just show up, she would cook it while I was at the office. I would come home and she'd cook for like a week of food. I'd come home and I'd have it. And so that was great. That was a really powerful one. Now it's me clicking reorder on Seamless from a place that sells an amazing shawarma bowl,
Yeah.
with double chicken.
Nice.
I would say I spend a lot on software.
Yeah.
To the point where a lot of my friends who are also tech nerds are like, why do you spend so much on,
Mm-hmm.
like, I use Calendly, I use Zoom. If anything can save me time,
Mm-hmm.
and if I think that it saves me time every single day, I will invest in it.
Mm-hmm.
I have a personal trainer who's virtual.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm a huge fan of these subscription services that are around, like, I really think of them as coaches though. They're like, one of the first things I did after I left CartHook was I hired an engineer to brush me up on programming. I basically hired a programming tutor, because I was like, I
Nice.
have not coded. Like, I've mostly been managing, I've been doing design, and not only that, I was like, I just want to get better. Like, I always want to get better.
Mm-hmm.
And so I, rather than hiring someone to build a product for me, I hired a really smart engineer who I'd hired before, like years ago, and I was like, I will pay you to do like pull requests and to give me to like basically tell me everything that I'm doing wrong and bring me up to speed on how like PHP and Laravel have changed since I last was like programming day to day.
Right. That's super cool,
So
man. What's
investing in coaches
yeah,
is like, again,
that's awesome. What are you doing development wise these days? Or are you using Laravel? You mentioned Laravel. I'm a big
yeah,
Laravel guy myself, actually.
really, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Is that your primary weapon of choice these days?
Although I think I noticed that when I signed up for your site, I noticed that it was like Laravel
You
scaffolding.
saw it? You saw
Yeah, I did.
it?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
I just remember that right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. I mean, so going back to what we were talking about around, like, I studied English in college. I'm an engineer. I love building stuff. I do not want to optimize everything. What I care about most is I want a few tools that I'm really confident that I can, that like I'm experienced with, and that I can use them to build a product and to build a scalable product. So I've been doing a lot with Laravel Vapor, which is serverless Laravel.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the I have a very narrow stack, which if you talk to some engineers, they would basically say that what I'm advocating for is stupid, which I'm okay with. I don't care.
Which is true of
Because I think for
basically
me,
everything.
it's
Somebody's going to tell you it's stupid.
yeah, yeah, and they're probably even better engineers than me. Like, but the issue is like it's about like what are you trying to do, and what I'm trying to solve for is I'm not necessarily trying to choose the best language for the situation. The truth is that most languages and frameworks you can, if you're good at it, like you can build anything.
Yeah.
What I care about most is familiarity with the different tools and bottlenecks, so that when I'm building something or if I'm hiring an engineer to work with me, we can immediately work in a shared framework that I'm comfortable with and I understand. Like CartHook is built in Laravel. And so every product I work on now, it's not like CartHook. That experience with CartHook and Laravel was extremely, extremely important for me, in part because of all the experiences we had around scaling it. And so I can now go into Laravel projects, and I don't necessarily know how we're going to solve everything, but I'm confident that we can figure out, and that I've probably seen a variation of that problem before.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so Tailwind is a big thing. Using Tailwind, Laravel. Um, the thing where I've gone back and forth on is what front end library or framework to use, whether it's React or Vue.
Mm-hmm.
Like I kind of missed that. We'll call that missed that ship when I was in a non technical role.
Mm-hmm.
So I never like I know JavaScript, but I'm not a. I try to get into Vue and React and Angular, and basically it's like, oh my goodness, this gets really complicated fast. And I remember back when we could just do like Ajax forms, and like so that's the stuff
Yeah.
that I'm just trying to minimize. What are the different technologies? Like there's Livewire now, which I don't know if you're familiar with Livewire.
I've heard about that. Yeah, I haven't dug into it too
Yeah,
much, but it seems like the people that use it seem to enjoy it, and it simplifies some of the things that can get complicated with frameworks.
yeah. Well, basically you can write PHP code to write JavaScript. So the idea is that instead of having to learn how to write Vue.js or React, you can accomplish a lot of those same functionality using PHP and
Mm-hmm.
Laravel. And what I'll say is like, and this is like you don't know though until you start building stuff what the limitations are. And I'll say that like for One Click Pony, which is the product I'm working on right now, um, I said let's use Livewire in that stack, and we started brushing up against some things where this would be so much easier to do in Vue.js. And since I wasn't the one though building the Vue.js code, I ultimately he had to explain to me as to like why is he advocating to use Vue instead of shifting off of our Livewire approach. But what he said made sense, and I trust him. And so, but as a general framework, I was like, I want to start every project using the same stack,
Right.
which is again going back to if I'm doing freelance projects to like do cash flow, they're going to be Shopify related because like I'm working on a product myself that is for Shopify merchants.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm building a Shopify app for someone else, I can build that without a whole lot of context switching and just build upon knowledge I already have.
Right. Right. Yeah. It's that compounding interest of the skill set, the network around Shopify stuff, the probably tying in even to like the partnership program or people that
Yep.
and things like that. I love your tagline is like
Oh,
bending Shopify to the will of seven-figure merchants, something like that.
right. Yeah.
What's some of the interesting stuff that you've done with Shopify, with maybe unique implementations or functionality that's been interesting?
So, I mean, I've been just trying to figure out how to explain what I do, and try. A lot of it is in the finding the language that appeals to the type of companies I enjoy working with.
Mhm.
Which, like, it sounds so like we'll call it like blowhard marketing ish of me to read 7-figure Shopify stores, but ultimately, going back to like the point of it is I want to find brands who are they have a product, they have some success, they know
Right.
they have like a general sense of how to build a business, and those are the brands who I can be disproportionately helpful for
Totally.
because I'm not a marketer. And so if you're making at least 100K a month in MRR, or not necessarily MRR, but 100K a month in revenue,
Yeah.
you probably have a lot of that stuff figured out. In terms of things that have been done that are useful or like unexpected, I love the Shopify app proxy, so you can do embedded apps. That was one of the early on, at least in the Shopify app ecosystem. It was like, I feel like it was no one knew about it. I'm sure because it's also something you only discover it by going into a subset of the app properties to be able to enable it. So back when the whole idea was how do you have the checkout on your own domain? Because it used to be like on Shopify, every checkout page was on something.myshopify.com, right? So the solution, and it was like the first solution I've ever seen, is just use an app proxy, and then you can have your checkout page on your domain, right? Like,
Gotcha.
because the app proxy is it's a reverse proxy and it's after your domain. So you literally could just do an app proxy to the external checkout and it'll show up on your store. And so that was I'll call it one of the things where it was a very simple solution and it was provided out of the box. It's just you didn't know to try it that way. And I think there's a fair number of examples of that with even Shopify, because Shopify has a lot of surface area. There's the Ajax API. There's a bunch of different APIs. And as I mentioned earlier in the conversation, not every API can be used. It depends a bit on your sales channel. Depends what store what depends a bit on what plan the store themselves is on.
Right.
You now have 3 or 4 different types of apps. So I would say that was probably one of the biggest unexpected ways of using Shopify's own technology to like solve a cool problem.
Yeah, that's one of the, so you were early on with that solution because that's one of the things that has gotten pretty popular, like people having to check out on their own domain.
And it's always been possible. Eventually Shopify changed it themselves. Now the checkout is on their own domain, but that was the simplest solution to be able to have it. And it's kind of like one of those things where it's staring everyone in the face, and a lot of it comes down to like just thinking to apply something in a different way.
Right.
Tinkering. And even if you part of what I've liked, what other people have done that's been smart is like the order bumps, right? Like finding ways to modify the checkout page to be able to add a little bit more customization. I think I've been impressed by some of the implementations I've seen with that.
Is that, I might not be familiar. Order bump, is that an app?
Yep. Yeah, there's a few of them. I believe they only work with Plus stores because you need to be able to install some stuff on the checkout page.
Right.
But I've even seen some people do some cool stuff on the thank you page where back in the day it used to be that people would put like JavaScript in like the Google Analytics ID because you could just paste JavaScript in there. I think that was an early one I saw some people doing. Basically, we're just trying to figure out how can I have JavaScript fire anywhere so that I have more control and can adjust the DOM.
Right. A buddy of mine was telling me that Cloudflare has these workers now or something like that where you can inject.
I use those a lot.
That's cool. You can inject at the edge JavaScript even if you're not on Plus or whatever.
Yep. That's interesting. I actually, so that's a perfect example. I hadn't thought of applying it on like in the Shopify context. I use serverless workers all the time though to do reverse proxies. So I'm working with one brand right now in my consulting where they have Webflow for the landing pages for their marketing page. We have actually a custom Laravel app for the checkout, and then they also have some other APIs for like a personalized quiz. And we need to give the impression that they're all 3 of these things are operating on the same domain, which is impossible in part because the top level site is Webflow. You can't, right? Like, so the way you accomplish it is using Cloudflare serverless workers where you're not paying for bandwidth. It's effectively JavaScript. I think it actually supports other languages too. But at any rate, like you can accomplish it through JavaScript. It's super powerful. And because it's Cloudflare, I more or less blindly trust that a lot of the stuff they build is dope.
Yeah. You talk
I
about
think
like,
maybe.
oh, sorry, go
Sorry,
ahead.
go ahead.
Now I should say Cloudflare, it's like you talk about decentralization versus
Yeah.
centralization. It's like we're all centralized on Cloudflare. And for the most part, they do a great job. Every once in a while, there's an outage. But for the
Yep.
most part, they do a tremendous job.
And when you look at like SSL certificates and these things that were a pain in the ass, and that's using Let's Encrypt. But I'd say that from a product perspective of like making the boring stuff and like not just boring, but like painful stuff like SSL certificates, making it not painful. Cloudflare has done that in so many different areas.
Mhm.
Although I was Googling, or what's it called when you're Googling on Twitter? See if people are like to find people who are talking about it. I
Twitter
don't know if it's
searching. Yeah.
twittering. Yeah, I don't know. I was searching over the Twitterverse,
Yeah.
and because so one of the things I've been doing over the last year is buying stocks in the companies that I use. So when I was first
Brilliant.
building One Click Pony, I was like using SMS all day long. So I bought a bunch of Twilio. I was like,
I hate you.
I don't. I just. I wish I'd bought Shopify stock back when we were first using Shopify, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is one that I will can to this day. So I bought some Shopify stock.
Right.
I also bought some big commerce to hedge my bets,
Nice.
which I've
Nice.
only lost money on so far. But no, I bought Twilio early in part because I was building stuff in SMS, and like I was mentioning, like the early version of One Click Pony was a one click buy button that can be embedded in email, which ironically is what fastest raised a bunch of money to do. So I built this 7 years ago and was using it with Stripe.
Yeah.
And most of the advice I got was just like who's gonna use that?
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't know. And so that was when I met Jordan, and Jordan and I started CartHook. And so
Nice.
I've always had this one click buy button just like sitting there. Um,
And
and
like,
so
I gotta
then
use this for something, B2B,
I,
something.
I was like, it's cool. And
Yeah.
so then I was looking into SMS, and so we made it so you could reply to buy. Like you just reply buy, and it'll automatically buy it just
Got it.
by like texting. And so that's when I was like, oh wow, Twilio is actually really powerful, and we can do some cool stuff. So, so then I've been looking at other companies like Cloudflare and what are other
Right.
infrastructure products that might be a good investment. But I know nothing about investing, so
Right.
it's maybe a little bit better than betting or
No, but
gambling.
it's true that, if you're in tech and you're using these products, you don't feel like you're early. Like if you're using Twilio, that's the,
Right.
the obvious thing.
Yeah.
Like everybody knows you use Twilio.
Yeah.
But like we have to
Yeah.
remember that we're early adopters compared to the rest of the economy at
Yeah.
large. So it's
Yeah.
probably still a good opportunity. I have to say, I love the name One Click Pony. It's fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
And like you say, you're not a marketer, but I feel like you're good at call it marketing or call it, wording things, expressing things well. Like you have a cool brand and all that.
Thank you, man. Well, I think
Yeah.
that's partially why it's been hard to do. Like, I've kind of always found for a while, I thought I wanted to do product instead of engineering because I never, like, I'd say, like, I'm a decent programmer. I'm also a decent designer. Like, I'm not the best of either of those for sure. And also, like, but like, I really enjoy business problems, but I'm not necessarily the best business person either. And so I've been trying to figure out what's my niche that is like a combination of all those things where I'm better at that one. Like that combination is more powerful than being individually good at any one thing. But I
Right.
know I appreciate you saying that. I think my biggest challenge and hang up actually is content.
Really.
I'm much more comfortable having a conversation like this. I've been writing a blog post for my newsletter for the last 2.5 years. I've been working on the welcome email. I'm not like, this is a true story. I have like probably like 80 versions of my welcome email. I even took a class on writing, and it's not that like I'm scared of being judged. I mean, maybe to an extent I am,
Yeah.
but no, like my thing. I've been trying to figure out how can I create byproducts of all the things that I'm learning and reading. The biggest feedback I get from my friends is you share way too many friggin' links, dude. Like, and I give them no context.
Right.
Whereas I'm like, no, just read it and it'll make sense to you. And so one of the things I've been learning, and it's funny that you mentioned like all the links that I share,
All
like
the freaking
my
subscription
muted
sites.
me.
Yeah.
Yeah, my friends have muted me. Um, because what they say that they want, and I don't blame them, is they want context. They
Yeah.
want a summary of like what's the TLDR.
You just keep you just keep
I just keep
blasting it
saying them.
out.
Well, because then they're like, why didn't you? Then they'll find something they'll find something. And they'll be like, why didn't you tell me about this? And I'll be like, well, I probably did, but you muted me.
Yeah.
And but like, so I'm trying to find. I'll tell you, like a business. And this goes back to the like trying to find like business ideas that you're like are perfect for you.
Yeah.
I was like, I just want to build a premium version of Nuzzle.
Right.
I just want to like because Nuzzle you can't do any branding. I want to
Right.
be able to even like summarize it. Substack is kind of doing this now. It's like I
Right.
just want like I read through. I have my process for digesting information. I want to
Dude.
like if I share Instapaper with you, the things aren't highlighted. They're only highlighted for me. I'm like
Right.
that makes no sense.
Right.
If I share with you an Instapaper thing, it should be highlighted and you can see my comments and my highlights.
Right.
Like I just want to do that and then combine that with Nuzzle.
That's a
Um,
cool idea because like I feel like I looked at a bunch of stuff you shared and there was a lot of really interesting stuff in there. And then a couple times I clicked through to the Nuzzle and the Nuzzle layout is like, there
yeah,
it could be cleaner, right? And then right below your post, it's like showing your friends' posts or whatever. It's like
yeah,
cross promoting and stuff. So I could imagine something that like was simpler and cleaner, and you could just share a short blurb. You know what I mean? And I think there would be
yeah,
because there's so much value in just curating. Like there was a lot of
yeah.
interesting stuff there, B2B, ecom, different things that I found myself interested in. You know?
Well, and I think Web does a great job of that. I think 2 p.m. That's probably the best example I've seen of part of what I dig about. Are you familiar with his
Yeah,
newsletter?
yeah. Webb Smith.
Where like yeah, Webb Smith, where he has like basically like there's like an excerpt, and then there's like the editor's notes.
Okay,
Like if I were to model something, it would probably be that. Um,
nice.
he and so, but no, I like this idea. I don't know how many other people besides me would pay for it. But it's a huge problem because I read so much. Like my biggest fear is wasting my time reading stuff and not translating that to knowledge.
Hmm.
And so I've taken courses on that too. Like like
It's
building a
intense,
second brain is a great course
right?
around effectively what's your approach for storing information. I use Evernote and like making sure that you're reevaluating things you're writing so that you can apply it.
Hmm.
So for me, yes, like speaking is much more natural.
Hmm.
The challenge can be then is how do I build something that how can I extract things I'd love to share with you and talk to you about
Hmm.
in a form that is natural to me, but also that can be shared and that people can see it and they can get a better sense. Like for me as a
Yeah,
designer, it used to be having a portfolio of my work. Like you could go to skinnyandbald.com right now, you can see my work, and I can't even tell you how much business that's gotten me.
right,
It's probably why Jordan. I mean, that's why Jordan and I first met in the first place. Um,
right.
but yeah, so this idea of showcasing what you're reading and what you're thinking about is really powerful. But um,
Yeah, that would be interesting. I have the opposite problem, which is I don't want to read anything long form these days.
huh?
And I
Yeah.
just like I want to read tweets that are digestible. And I feel like sometimes I
Hmm.
feel like it's great and I have my feed really well curated and it's making me
Yeah.
smarter. And then other days I
Yeah.
feel like it's just making me dumber and I got to sit
Yeah.
down, turn it off, and read a book. Um,
Yeah.
but there's so many different formats I listen to podcasts. I listen to a ton of podcasts.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, which is funny because I generally hate podcasts because it feels like people just talking, and I'm kind of like, what's the point? Teach me
get to the
something.
point. Yeah, yeah.
Which is ironic because AD and I we recorded our first episode together this morning, which is
That's
called and
awesome.
our podcast is called it's called the Dog and Pony Show, uh, where he's talking about the process of building Cogsy, his new SaaS,
Yep.
and I'm talking about One Click Pony. So the idea is like we'll bring on people like I'm sure you'll come on and like we can talk about like, but no, it's like one of those things where, um, but personally, I've listened to a bunch of podcasts, but I really prefer things that are more like I want to take something out of it. I
Right.
don't want to just. So I'm
Right.
more into audiobooks and
Right.
reading normal books.
Right. Yeah, there's so many options, I think you have to find what for consuming content and creating it.
Mm-hmm.
and you kind of got to find what works. I know we're over our time, and I'm
Oh yeah, yeah.
remembering that you're on a schedule, so we should probably
Oh no, I put time up for you, but no, I appreciate that,
you
man.
got some
Thank you.
time. Yeah, let me know if you have a hard stop. Um,
I don't. I
but
don't. No.
okay, cool. But yeah, like I think you got to find that format that really works, to where you can just put stuff out and be productive, and there's something that you enjoy about just putting your ideas out into the world,
Yeah.
regardless of if there's direct actionable revenue from them. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Um,
Yeah. Well, I think it's just so easy to ramble
mm,
and to talk
yeah,
and to speak in generalities.
yeah,
And I know that what I appreciate more is like behind the scenes, like from the cutting room floor
hmm,
of what was it actually like. And those are, actually think Jordan and Brian have done a great job of that
hmm,
with Bootstrapped Web,
yeah,
where they're like honest
yeah,
and transparent. I think like those are the stories I personally appreciate.
yeah,
Um, because it's easy. What the funny thing is, like even starting One Click Pony, the advice I always got was like, oh, just like cold email people to like find your first customers.
hmm,
And I'm like, yeah, okay, I know that. Like the challenge becomes in like there's a million different potential levers around content, or like, oh, just like post to LinkedIn and come up with your content strategy and do like I've done things with built with lists.
hmm,
I've hired 2 email marketing agencies to help with like outbound. I've also read that that's like the worst strategy to do because you can't outsource that,
hmm,
especially like if you until you have like product, like a real product market. Um, so I think it's advice is easy. What's harder is sharing how you navigated the stuff.
hmm,
Um,
hmm. I think it'd be cool to see the podcast you guys do. So you're basically going to be talking about the products that you're building and kind of a behind the scenes kind of a deal.
yeah, yeah. Like
Nice.
today, we were even talking about the like hiring engineers like remote and
Hmm,
how that's changed even over the last like 5 years.
hmm,
Um, and talking about distribution strategies in
hmm,
marketing.
hmm,
He's technical, like, and that's part of what I love about him is like he's a non-technical founder, but he's you talk to him, he understands the tech. Um,
hmm.
and I come from the tech and product where I've basically just been trying to like befriend people who are really good at marketing in part through I'm hoping through osmosis and like conversations of like these are the things I love talking to people who are good at stuff that I really want to learn.
Hmm.
Um,
That's
and so I
awesome.
think the podcast should be a fun form where I expect he will be drilling me and grilling me and holding me accountable for some stuff, which we could do as friends, but it's probably more fun to do it publicly.
Yeah.
um,
That's cool. Yeah, I
yeah.
started listening to his Life Profitably podcast,
Yep.
and
Yep.
I really like it. Like he's on this whole, mindfulness thing, and he talks about, with a lot of people about a lot of interesting stuff. And I'm kind of on a similar kick, I guess, with like mindfulness and, all that stuff,
Oh, I
meditation
saw you were looking for like psychedelic trips in Oregon for a friend.
and
Something.
asking for a friend. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I keep hearing about psychedelics on podcasts and stuff, and I'm like, wow,
Goodness.
maybe
Joe
that'll.
Rogan, I think, brought that to the masses.
I think so. Are you a Rogan fan?
I I found a lot of the people he's brought on really interesting, and
Yeah.
he to me strikes me as like a thoughtful, interesting guy. He's very polarizing,
Hmm,
which is fine, I guess. So yeah, like I'm not a unless it's someone who I'm interested in hearing,
hmm.
then I probably won't listen to it. I think like everyone else, I watched the Elon Musk interview.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there've been a few other like really interesting characters,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, it's kind of wild. I think he had Dave Chappelle on today. I just
okay,
noticed, but like Dave Chappelle just popped in like towards the very end of the episode randomly, with this other
uh huh,
dude, and I think he did a couple shows actually in Austin, which I had seen. I had seen that online like a week ago, and I was like, oh man, I got to make it down to that, but I didn't.
yeah,
So, but yeah, he's a beast. Anyways, Ben, it's been fun. I appreciate it.
dude. No, thanks so much for having me on here, and I think it'll be fun to at some point we can flip the tables.
That
The
sounds
tables will have
good.
turned, and I'll be asking you questions.
That sounds good, man. Where's the best place for people to find you online?
Skinnyandbald.com.
Awesome.